Cool. Well, shall we begin then?
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was nice hanging out yesterday again in the nice rain and the clean air, which is a big deal. Jeffrey and I got to meet up down at Noble Coffee. We saw, I think Alex was down there, so we saw some real life people. I saw Chayla today down at the sculpture building. I don't know if Chayla is in yet, but Michael Parker, one of our beloved colleagues. So it was nice to just go down there, but it felt like, Left for Dead or, Walking Dead or some kind of zombie movie where I was like, oh, they might have antibiotics here. Kind of like we were going back to the before times and raiding the thing for canned food. It kind of felt like that. I had to go to my office to pick up some stuff. But then I walked across the case like I used to do every day and was, I remember this. So
Yeah, the sculpture building is open now with signs on the outside and stuff. I think that's
Yeah.
the only really
it's
art.
Open for students, but not for like the public.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, which it never was, but I think they're just putting the signs up like so that they can have ventilation.
Yeah, it felt like civilization was, reforming or something like, oh, there's survivors here. It was nice. Michael and Shayla were out there talking about, how they were going to do stuff. So
yeah, that was good to see you in person.
Oh, yeah, there you are. Yeah, that was awesome. That was like, whoa. So yeah, you're there in the before time. Why don't you show us where you are? Give us a little visual tour of this cool space.
So right now I have a studio space set up in the drawing room. So
oh, you're in the drawing room. Nice.
I'm in the drawing room right now. That's my studio space, like right out my window. You can see the sculpture building, but yeah.
We'll return someday. Thank you. Cool. All right. Well, Jeffrey, do you want to start? We can talk about the turn-in process.
Yeah, for sure. You guys can hear me okay? Yeah. So this is the beginning of week 3 for this class, and we're going to have you turn in your journals basically by the end of recitation, by the end of your recitation this week. So your journal should already technically be quote unquote turned in. You sent us the link. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at them over the starting on Thursday after the recitation and kind of, sort of see what you've done so far and give you some feedback. So the kind of timeline for this week is like you can work in your journals today. The recitation is mostly going to be kind of a workshop day where you can kind of, maybe polish up some messy things in your journal / notebook / sketchbook, however you're treating it. You can like create a little title page, organize some things, but think of the recitation as like kind of a time for you to kind of compose things before we might see them. Some of the things that you might want to think about are like, does your notebook have kind of like a purpose yet? Like, are you using it for a specific thing, or have you used it for specific things? And how would we know as your professor is looking in on that that's kind of what you've been using it for? So maybe some things have kind of been like personal, messy brainstorming or some sketches, but there's really no sort of path for an outside viewer to kind of understand. So it might be a good chance to sort of like put in some of that sort of metadata or sort of like outward facing, like this is what I did on this page. Here I'm doing this. It doesn't have to like be written for us, but it just kind of has to be almost like if 2 years went by and you were to look at that page and you didn't have any idea yourself what was on it, how could you just kind of remind you or just give a reminder of what it is you're actually doing and thinking about? So that's kind of what we're looking for when we review them, is just to have you started. Is there a general direction? And can we actually kind of understand what that direction is? We're not looking for like a crazy amount of content or pages. We just want to understand that everyone's kind of like sort of like on the right path. So that's kind of what this that's kind of what this review is about. And there'll be 2 more reviews. One is going to be mostly kind of like a midterm kind of sharing thing. I think that will be on week 7 or I think that's week 7. And then the final one is at the end of the term. And that one is more just like turning it in for your grade. So this is kind of like the first check-in, you know. Any questions about that? No, pretty clear, pretty obvious, I guess. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat, and Miles or I will answer. You can also ask in recitations. But everyone pretty much has turned in their notebook link on Moodle, I'm sure by now. The way that you've turned in your notebook, it's like a forum post, right? You had to kind of go to this Moodle forum and sort of post the link. You can always go back and edit that post and add some descriptions or something. For example, let's say you, for some reason, have 2 Figma documents. This was like a question that came up in my recitation. Like in your little forum post, you could say, I use this one for all the messy stuff, and this one is like more for this. So, you know, it's really up to you how you use this software. If you feel like you kind of want to break the rules or something, or you're using it in a really specific way, just like you can use that forum post to kind of give us a preamble before we even click on the Figma link. So, because that's how we're going to review things. We're going to go to Moodle, look at the links, go into your name, you know, read what you may have said or not, click it, and then sort of like check out your work. Anything to add, Miles?
I think that sounds fabulous.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. No, that sounds great.
So before we move on, in the chat, we have some questions about Figma and using Figma with the tablet. And so for those of you who don't have the chat popped open, maybe it might be fun to pop it open and jump into that conversation. But one of the interesting comments that I'm reading from Will is that, quote unquote, Figma isn't a drawing program. So some people are trying to use Figma with the Wacom tablet or Sketch, and then one of the ideas there is that Figma doesn't really do that very well. There's no pressure sensitivity. You might have difficulties kind of trying to get it to work, but it seems like some people are getting it to work. I think one thing that's interesting to think about Will's comment about like Figma isn't a drawing program. I think it's kind of interesting to think about that because it makes me kind of think about like, well, what is drawing? What is a drawing program? And like, why would Figma, like, not to be on their defense or to be an ad man for Figma or anything, but what is it that they would like, why is it that they wouldn't want that stuff to work or not pay attention to, let's say, a Wacom tablet working or having pressure sensitivity? Like, what is it that creates that sort of split? And so I think it's kind of interesting to understand like that, you know, the software that we're using is changing. And just because it defines itself in one way at one time doesn't mean it's going to define itself or add new features for something different at a different time. You know, just like how like our apps on our phone kind of evolve and they add features and take them away and like change their sort of game plan. I think it's important to remember that software is like a changing thing. And so like, just because something doesn't work today doesn't mean it's not going to work soon, or that like there isn't some audience or need for a piece of software like that. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting to me to think about like what programs are used for specific things and how we like kind of like create those splits, you know. And in this case, I think it's interesting because it's like, oh, my piece of hardware X that I use for painting doesn't work with this, therefore the program isn't for this, which is like true, but also it's maybe for people who don't use that hardware or draw in a different way or something. So some other comments from Fritz. Figma started feeling a lot less bad when I stopped using it as a drawing program. I started using it more like InDesign. Will says it's not that you can't draw on it, but it's not made for that. It's a graphic design program and it's a very minimal one. It doesn't have the features used for creation of other media types. GC says, I use Figma more as a presenter than drawing software because it doesn't work well with my drawing style / tablet. And then someone else is saying that they draw on their iPad and upload it to Figma. That's what Tally's saying. And yeah, that's totally fine. So like, you know, the reason we're using Figma is because it's really generic. And so it kind of forces you to think about like, to think about thinking, you know, like it helps you like organize your thoughts and put your stuff in there, but it's not necessarily going to be like the best for every use case. Speaking of which though, Miles and I were talking about, a few things. Miles actually wanted to share some sketches, right? Because you went rock climbing this weekend.
Yeah, I did. It was fun. We took a quick trip up to Smith Rock. I don't know if has anyone ever been up to Smith Rock, up kind of outside of Bend.
Yeah.
Cool. Does anyone else rock climb here? No? Okay. Well, I don't know. It's the outdoorsy kind of place. Oh, so I see some yeses. Okay, cool. Yeah, and it was funny, in one of my other classes, there's another student named Miles, and he also has a shaved head and a beard, and we were talking about rock climbing together, so it was pretty funny. He was like, yeah, I just started. So I don't know. Anyway, cool. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this just for a second because it was relating back to these Figma notebook idea, and I'll pull some stuff up here on the screen. So I'll share the screen in a moment. Share screen. This one. So you probably can't see this yet, but we'll zoom in on it here. So this is a diagram that I started doing when I was starting to plan a trip that we actually didn't do this, but it was going to be a 3-person trip. And so we were figuring out how do you do climbing with 3 people, because normally you do climbing with 2 people. And so I did some research and tried to understand this, because one of the things that I've learned is that, you know, when you're doing something like rock climbing, you very personally, and only you, have to really understand every single last detail explicitly because there's no place to hide, you know, there's no one can help you, and it's you, and if you make a mistake, then like you die. So it's one of those things like you're highly motivated to actually figure it out, and that's really unlike the rest of my life where I'm extremely sloppy and brainless and disorganized and casual about everything. And so there's this kind of sense of, well, for this, I have to be very explicitly explicit. I have to know everything. So I started to do this, and it got more and more complicated. That's the thing, is like, I have a kind of brain, kind of mind that goes, yeah, okay, I got it. I understand. You know, I'm ready to jump in to start doing it. But for this, I went, well, wait a minute, slow down, make sure you understand all the steps. So this is the diagram. So this starts off, and so what I realized is that there were people in these different roles, so they're color coded, and that you would say certain things as well, like that would be, you don't want to have a lot of chatter. You just want to be able to say explicit commands. So when the leader, the person in green is the leader here, and they start off and they're climbing. The person in red here is belaying the climber, so the little B there. And then there are 2 separate ropes, which was another confusing thing to this. And so using color to separate the ropes, so that the lead climber has this magenta rope, and then the person who's going to go second, the one in the middle, has both ropes, this yellow rope, which is tied in here, and then tied into the other, the third climber. So once this green climber gets to the top, they tie into the anchor here, this little A, and then they say, I'm tied into the anchor. And these guys are hanging out down here. And then once they're tied in, they say off belay. So that means they're no longer dependent on this person for their life. Because, during this whole process, if this person in red here lets go of the rope, then this person, if they fall, they would die. So that's a very important thing to understand this transition when you're off belay. And then our lead climber here pulls the rope up of the first rope. And then the rope is piled up here, dressed up here. And then this climber is now ready to go. So the rope was down here and now it's up here. Then when this climber is ready to belay this climber, they say belay on. And this climber can climbing. Then this person gets up and they tie into the anchor as well so that they're safe and that they can be off belay. And so the purple rope is all up at the top now. And then they're ready for the yellow rope to bring up the red. And the green person, who's the leader, is also belaying. So the light blue person isn't really doing anything at this point, but they're safe. They're tied in. Then they pull the rope up, all the slack of the yellow rope. So now the bulk of the yellow rope is up here and just the part that's attached to the climber. And then the belay is on. So now it's safe for the red to climb. And they can climb. And they get to the top and they tie into the anchor. And then they're off belay. And then they switch the belays, switching to bottom belay. And finally, now on belay, and now the red climber can be the lead climber and go up. So quite a story. That's my saga.
It's a nice like good night moon story.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone's like asleep now. Like, wow, that was really thrilling. But
I was just thinking that's probably what who's the like freestyle climber that the movie
Alex
was made
Honnold,
about?
yeah.
Yeah, that's probably what he would tell his kids before bed,
If I could comment on your diagram real quick, I really like your use of color for all the individual climbers like that. Like, we had to look at similar stuff in the rock climbing course I took.
Oh,
and
nice.
Like when it comes to the positions and stuff like that, like, that's really crucial. And they were all in black and white. And so I think just having distinct colors the way you did, like, really helps it stand out, which is really important for safety too. So like, that's kind of something that, I don't know, I just want to comment on. I think.
Nice. Well, thank you. Thank you. That's great. And I think one of the things that's so cool about this is like you're talking about, like you did a class. And so I think this is one of the things that your notebook can kind of be about, is like you're tracing your thinking. So I didn't even think about this as something that I would ever present. But as I did it, I was saying, oh, how would I, like, what do I need to learn something? And that's kind of a cool thing. So I really appreciate that comment, Fritz. That's great. That oftentimes that motivation, like most of us have probably had that experience of trying to learn something and not getting it. Maybe you've had that in this class, when we get into programming in the spring, that might be something that really scares people. But I think the fun of it comes when you start to break it down for yourself, and then it becomes yours and you can really enjoy it, and it becomes kind of part of your kind of molecular structure or something. So cool. Thank you.
Yeah, one thing that I really like about it is the color, but also specifically, I really like how you didn't draw the surface that they're climbing. So like, at first that kind of like confused me. I was like, oh, there's no cliff to climb, or they're not anywhere, or this person's above and this person's below. But I kind of appreciated that as I was trying to like follow the logic. I realized that like having stuff there didn't really make sense, because it's really about the arrangement of these ropes. And so I thought that was kind of like interesting for me to like kind of understand like, oh, this thing that should be there, like the wall, you know,
Mhm.
the cliff or whatever,
Mhm.
is missing. And then I was like, oh, there must be a reason why it's missing. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's because it's really about these other forms that I'm supposed to be paying attention to.
Mhm.
So not only in a way did that highlight the ropes in a cool way, but it also kind of kept my like imagination thinking about like the space in which they're climbing as like a variable. So like they could be climbing anything or like any kind of terrain. Like,
Mhm.
because I guess one thing about climbing is, you know, there's obstacles and there's like, you know, there's undercuts and like different kinds of things. And these rules are kind of like general rules for just moving upward. It's not really necessarily about like how you might go around an obstacle or something. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of interesting that you kind of like don't say that this is only for like a straight flat wall. You
Mhm.
know, it's more of
Right.
like this generic, it's more of like this generic kind of principle. And so without putting the wall in there, you don't have to necessarily like say that, you know, like if
Mhm.
the straight wall was in there, I would maybe assume that, oh, this is what you do when it's like smooth climbing, you know, but I assume it's actually kind of more of
Yeah.
like a general principle that you do, right?
Totally. Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think the other, I mean, just the other thing too was like, just again, like Jeffrey pointed out, was just deciding what to leave out, like what's essential. And I don't know if you've ever tried to assemble something from instructions, but like one of the things that's kind of funny is like you're in your house and it's all cluttered and you've got like old like Ritz crackers on the floor and, you know, clothes and junk in the way, and you're losing the screws and the shag carpet, and you look at the instructions and everything's like totally white and clear and clean. You can just like, oh, I wish I was in there doing it. So yeah. All right, the other thing about this is I left off the arms of the characters. You know, it's kind of for the same thing that Jeffrey's talking about, that just because it wasn't important, and the legs kind of tell the story of what they're doing. That and because there's so much information actually going on in this diagram, there's so much complexity in what the procedures actually are, that I wanted to kind of strip out any excessive details that weren't helping really focus on what's the essential idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And like adding the two arms would maybe make it a little bit harder to track the ropes.
Yes, exactly.
But also you didn't necessarily just draw like variables
Right.
for the people. Like you
Right.
weren't just kind of doing math where you're like,
Right.
this is person A and this is person
Right.
B. So the people do have some kind of like
Yeah.
gesture to them. And they're even represented as climbers with their little helmets on, so that's nice and safe,
Mhm.
I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this is that you're not only kind of describing the work that you're doing, like is not just describing this process, but kind of like what Fritz was getting at, saying that they had read similar, like they had been in a rock climbing class and they saw similar diagrams or things that were trying to do the same thing. The work that you're developing here is actually a graphic language, right?
Right.
So you're not just creating this as a one-off, you're also kind of deciding, okay, what does it mean when you have a quote unquote climber? And what does it look like when a rope is attached to that quote unquote climber? And like, does each climber have a certain colored rope? Or how would we like determine roles in the situation? Like labeling someone as like a bee, for example. In this case, the bee is actually a person, but the person is like the person is fitting into a particular role, right? So when I see the bee, I think of like, oh, okay, this is like this person's role in the situation, and this is like the graphic method that you chose to like label that role, or to like dictate this is like a role of a person. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to me how it's not just this diagram, but it's also like, first you also have to develop the rules for all the pictures, and then you can actually draw the pictures.
And there's a process to that I like, that idea of it. It is kind of like algebra, you know, like you could say as a rule, like the number 3,147 plus 963 equals whatever that equals. Or you could say A plus B equals C, you know. So that idea of like, you know, you're trying to figure out, like Jeffrey's saying, like, oh, roles, positions, like what, and that's kind of the fun of doing a diagram. And the last thing I was going to say about this is that, like, this would have driven me absolutely insane, and I probably would be like crying on the street right now if I had tried to do this all entirely with colored markers, let's say, because there's something about being able to do it digitally that makes it so much easier for me to get my mind around it once and I really thought about Figma, you know, the fact that you can do this little crunky drawing of this climber and then you can just, you know, make a copy of it and pull it over here so that it fits into that spot. And it makes it, it's almost like having like a font, you know, like whenever you type, you don't have to write each letter R and each letter S. You're just hitting the same thing over and over and over again. It's like for a diagram or for prototyping a game, you know, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it actually makes me think of an idea that I had maybe a year ago or so for a game. I was painting on an iPad like these little stick figures and like drawing in my notebook with my pen, and I was drawing these little figures with the line connecting them, and I was kind of thinking about some different kinds of games. I was thinking about, like, here, let me share my screen really quick. So like specifically, like it's your graphic language, I guess, that reminds me of it. Let me just jump make sure you guys can see me working. Increase my line size a bit. So yeah, so this language of like having like a figure of some kind, maybe with arms or maybe without arms. And then like that, like it's so easy to draw a figure like that. And also like having multiple figures, maybe slightly different identities so that we're not going to confuse them. So I had this idea a while ago of trying to do some kind of a like a rope game, like almost like two jump ropers. And so maybe the rope would be, you know, like a slightly different color. And so I was imagining the game would be kind of like a top-down sort of Stardew Valley kind of thing, or you would have some kind of arena, like some kind of level in the game, right? And maybe there would be some kind of object there, like there would be a tree of some kind, perhaps. And the tree would be like maybe slightly broken, and so that would be maybe like part of your task. Let me lock this here. Where's lock? Oh, there it is. So let's say the game had some kind of like an object, like a tree or some kind of like thing that was maybe moving. I was kind of imagining that you would be controlling both of these people at once. Maybe you would actually be using, you know, like a game controller that has like the two sticks on it, like a game controller like that, and maybe with two buttons here. And so I was kind of thinking like one stick would control a person, and then the button would control whether they're grabbing for the rope. And so the other one would, you know, control that person and whether they're grabbing for the rope. And so the idea would be that you could control two characters, one with each finger, and at any time you could kind of reach for the rope and be holding on to the rope, or let go of it. So you could have these situations in which, let's say, getting back to this tree thing here, let's say you were kind of moving your sticks around in circles and moving the characters around, and then the rope could kind of become tied to the tree, and then both characters could move in the same direction, and then maybe like sort of like cut down the tree using the rope. Does that kind of make sense a little bit? And then I was thinking of like, would this be interesting as like a puzzle game, or would this be even interesting just as like an animation style of having these like two characters in different situations? But simply like what your diagram reminded me of is like kind of like not really where my idea was going. Like I kind of was, for a while I was like, oh, it'd be like cool as a game, but specifically the graphic language of like very simple figures seen from a distance, right?
Totally.
Like it's all about like this perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? With a lot of space around.
Yeah.
And then maybe like a line and then some kind of line, and that line is somehow like the thing that you use to do stuff,
Yeah.
you know? And so I wasn't really thinking about climbing necessarily. I was thinking about kind of traversing like a horizontal surface, right? Not like moving up and down in space like a Mario type of game.
Mm-hmm.
But still I was thinking of these like figures kind of connected by a rope.
Yeah.
And sort of in terms of the like graphic style, you know, I was thinking of games like this Lunar Lander game. I'm gonna have to type arcade because there's actual Lunar Lander in existence. But I was thinking of these kind of really simple arcade games that I used to play.
Oh.
I don't know if anybody's played these games before, but maybe I'll throw a screenshot in my Figma. So you can kind of get a sense for like, did anybody ever play these games, these old sort of like vector games? So yeah, so I was thinking about that game. There's also some games that have come out, like there's a popular game called Desert Golfing, which is it's like an iPhone/Steam game that that is really interesting, where it's kind of like this infinite golf generator game that has a very simple graphic language that's really similar. I mean, there's no figures in the game, right? Oops. There's no like people in the game, but you can see that this language is kind of similar, right? These like extremely simplified kinds of geometric forms, maybe flat colors, and then maybe like in this case, in this game, there's like still some vegetation and maybe like a kind of there's a golf ball basically that's like the active thing. So I was like, oh, what if it's not a ball? What if it's like a string or a jump rope? And then what if you control two people simultaneously and kind of link the rope together? It also reminded me of this game, Nobi Nobi Boy, which is the game that I probably played that's the most similar to this. So this is like a kind of, this was like an experimental PlayStation game. It didn't sell very well, but it's really interesting. And it was kind of designed more as like a toy than a game. And in this game, you have this worm, and the worm has two heads, or like a tail and a head, and each of those heads are controlled by different sticks. And so you can break the worm in two, and when the worm gets broken in two, you kind of have these two separate characters, but then also the worm can become one again, and then you basically just are a giant rope. So this is like the closest kind of like thing that I was thinking about. Although this game is like in 3D and the controls are really difficult, and like the idea that you become the rope or the two separate characters is kind of confusing. And so I was kind of also thinking about this other piece of software, which is kind of what got me going on drawing this, which is this this game called like Hidden Folks. Some of you may have seen this little game that came out not too long ago, but it's kind of like a I Spy kind of game. And it has these really simple character drawings. Maybe I can just try to find pop it in here too. So you see there's these really simplified kind of character drawings from this perspective that I was thinking about as well. This like top down, maybe somewhat isometric perspective. And this is basically like a, you know, kind of a Where's Waldo kind of game. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but kind of like finding little things, and like the people are animated and moving around this little landscape. So the thing that kind of like got me going on this wasn't necessarily like, oh, I want to make a video game. It was just thinking about this stuff visually, you know, like thinking about these simplified graphic forms, and like how could I, you know, if I ever wanted to do something about jump ropers or something, whether it's like a graphic novel about them, or, you know, just you know, some kind of story, or actually maybe like a performance of some kind. I was just like kind of like sketching out and kind of thinking like, what would the language be, you know, like how simple would the people be, you know, like the idea that you didn't put arms on them, that interests me. Like maybe my characters wouldn't need arms. But I don't know, I think that it's kind of interesting to just kind of compare our thoughts, and so also for me to like kind of start to like track this stuff, because I had some of these drawings in like a notebook, but I never actually like until like this moment really thought like, oh, like you know, maybe what this thing is like this slow building kind of like, oops, jump rope game like research thing for me, you know what I mean?
Totally.
Like maybe like now I can actually have a place to like think more about this stuff, because until I saw your drawing I was like, oh, that reminds me when I was like thinking this one afternoon in my sketchbook about these like jump rope people.
Yeah.
But you know, just in talking to you for these 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, like I was thinking about this game and this game and this and this, and now I'm like, all right, I have a better idea of like if I'm going to do something with these jump rope like things in my head, like with these little people. This is at least like a kind of a way for me to like get started thinking about that, right?
That's
Like I know for, yeah, and I guess my idea is it's like I know the visual perspective that I would want, right? I know that like simple graphics is important. I also have this idea that, you know, color for the rope is probably important, which I kind of just got from you, you know. And yeah, so I mean, it's interesting just like, you know, you showing this drawing and then me kind of like being like, oh, like you kind of figured out a little bit more of the language, and now I can steal that, you know, and maybe like adopt it for my own you know, for my own project or something.
Totally.
But yeah, I guess this is also maybe a bit of a kind of a demo of like how I like, this is what my Figma tab is throughout the day.
Absolutely.
You know, if I'm doing stuff in Figma, it's kind of like jumping between different programs, looking at my notebook, talking to someone, and slowly tracking stuff. I did make a really funny diagram last night that I thought maybe I would share with the class. That's a little bit more wild style. And I actually found out something really funny through making it, which is embarrassing, but also really interesting. So I thought maybe I could share with the class like what it was that I was doing. So let me bring this. Are there any questions or thoughts, by the way? Anyone have anything to share when I bring these images into Zoom?
Yeah, there's some cool questions here. Oh yeah, Unravel. Someone brought up the game Unravel. I had actually.
Oh yeah, is that?
Yeah, with a
Unravel's like a 3D game where you're like a little yarn guy.
Yep.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, Pikmin and Lemmings and like all these little games where it's like little tiny figures. I was thinking kind of about those.
Yep.
Like I've always been interested in games where you're really zoomed out, but there's still kind of people or figures.
Yeah.
I also really love these arcade games like Robotron and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. I'm transferring these files over.
Cool. Oh, there's a good question.
I should be able to.
There was a good question here from Olivia. How do you feel about, quote, borrowing, stealing ideas and integrating them? I never used to post my art without watermarks, but now everyone does that, e.g. Instagram. That's a good question. That's great.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a really good question, Olivia. I mean, I think that, so first of all, everybody can have different opinions about what the value of an idea is, but not only what the value of an idea is, but like what actually is an idea versus, let's say, like a work or an artifact or something like that. So like, you know, if you make a drawing or if you have an image, like a digital image, and post it to Instagram, is that an idea, or is that like a thing that you can point at, you know? And is a digital image more of an idea than, let's say, something that's on paper or like something that's painted? So like, is any of those, are those both equally not ideas, or is one closer to an idea or not? And this is like, you know, part of what makes something considered property, like intellectual property. Intellectual property doesn't need to have any artifacts associated with it, like directly, but in order for intellectual property to actually be considered property, there needs to be a bunch of artifacts that point to it, right? So like your logo might be a piece of intellectual property, but your logo has to be identified on surfaces and exist in order for you to like know that. So first of all, there's just this, like, there's this kind of, you know, big brain, like, what is it that we think of as an idea, and whether that can be stolen or not, right? And yeah, and then so secondly, there's the idea that, well, there's the situation that different people have different opinions about that, like valuing ideas or not, you know, like, so you might talk to someone and they might be like, oh yeah, ideas are shit, like all that matters is the execution, man, you gotta just get the work done, that's what really matters, right? So there's like that kind of opinion, which I can barely impersonate. And then whatever character it is I'm trying to do right now is horrible, but then there could be the other kind of approach, sort of the opposite approach, which is like, you know, anything that you think of is something that is inherently valuable, and if you say like, oh, you should make that purple, and then the person goes and makes it purple, and then you're like, you fucking stole that from me, you know. So that's like the other extreme, right? And I think we can kind of laugh at both of those extremes, right? About like ownership and ideas. And so, but artists, you know, we always copy stuff and want to take stuff and be influenced by stuff. And it's nice to be an influence too as an artist, and have other people be influenced by you in different ways. So I think the best rule of thumb is like to take very liberally from other ideas and from other projects and other people, but not to make that a secret, you know. Like when I was like, yeah, Miles, I'm stealing your idea now, like, you know, I'm implicating Miles by like saying, like, I'm telling him I'm want to use some of this stuff. That's also a way of him saying, oh, that's okay, or him being more involved, or like it keeps the conversation open. And often what happens, I think, is these conversations stay closed for too long, and then all of a sudden something comes out and it's like maybe a direct copy of something, or two people are friends and one people is working on something in secret for a long time that might be like really influenced by the other person's ideas, but they're not working on anything, right? I've seen like so many situations, different configurations of these exact situations in my life. And, you know, I'm not super old, so, you know, these kinds of things happen all the time. And I think the best thing to do is just to actually be really open about what it is you're taking, and take stuff constantly, because it's the only way to kind of like move through your influences. Yeah. So that being said, let me share this really funny diagram that I drew yesterday, and I'll walk you through it because it's of a very different nature than what Miles showed. I just took these. This is just on the notebook next to me. So I've been making t-shirts and selling t-shirts lately. And so I was trying to think about like t-shirts and youth culture and like pop culture. And like, so I was kind of thinking like, okay, well, what's the point of a band having a t-shirt? Or like, what's the kind of like point of like a t-shirt that just isn't white? Because the history of t-shirts, which isn't in this diagram, the history of t-shirts is that t-shirts are they're basically a Navy uniform thing. And it wasn't until like James Dean and some kind of like hot guys wore t-shirts in the Hollywood movies. Wearing a t-shirt was kind of like wearing a bra, you know, which is hard to believe. But like being James Dean in a movie with cigarettes and wearing a t-shirt is kind of like, you know, it's like sexy and hot and like really like, whoa, you know, it's like listening, it's like WAP, you know, it's like a Cardi B song right now. So at some point that was like pretty cool. But that was before.
That song's tasteless garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I don't get why WAP is so popular. Like, Cardi B is just a wannabe rapper. I just can't really
Yeah.
rap.
It's
Yeah, I
just-
mean, Tasteless Garbage is also what they said about Rebel Without a Cause when it came out. You know, just like this kind of movie where there's this guy like acting cool, half naked. You know, but
Well,
now
I
it
mean,
just seems like vanilla ice cream, I guess.
I mean, like that's just my opinion, man.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Sorry, I'm sounding a little rude right now. I have not eaten anything today.
Yeah, that's fine. You know,
And
we
what
all
are you
we all
doing?
have
Go eat.
opinions, but our opinions are actually generated out of our experience with culture. And so having an opinion doesn't necessarily make you unique or an individual. It actually sometimes means that you're just in a place in which you're part of a wave of other people having similar opinions, right? A lot of other people share your opinion, it sounds like, so you're not alone.
Yeah.
And I actually share your opinion too. You know, it's not something that we necessarily
like-
even have control over.
I just don't get it. Is it like for the shock value or something like that? Because I'd rather something be interesting and grab my attention more instead of just throwing ridiculous imagery at me every time and thinking it's always gonna like evoke like a response out of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about WAP if you want.
No.
All right.
Well, you know,
I mean, I'd be happy to talk about why it works, like why it is that why it exists as like a cultural entity, like what the strategy is, you know.
It just works.
So shock value is maybe is a small part of that. So you're kind of onto something there. Anyway, so let me just share this diagram really quick, and then we can devolve into whopping if you guys want, or discussing some other stuff. But just to show that, you know, Miles' diagram was a sequence, right? It was a sequence in which you kind of move through in a linear fashion, like step 1, step 2, step 3. And there were no lines cutting off the different sort of frames, but Miles was creating like multiple images in a linear sequence, right? And what you have here is a diagram that's like, there's no way to read this diagram, right? You don't read it from left to right, right? You can follow these different lines. And so what it is a set of nonlinear relationships, but there are paths that you can follow through. And so what I was kind of imagining was like, I was thinking like, okay, well, what if the reason why, let's say, a cultural movement would want to print something on a t-shirt is a form of generosity? Like, so I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, they want to advertise their movement. I wasn't thinking, oh, they want to make money. I was thinking, oh, they want to create some kind of sense of belonging for the other people who like believe in the cultural movement. So I was like, okay, maybe that's out of this idea of generosity, which I put here. And then so I thought, okay, so if generosity reached the hippies and they decided to make a t-shirt, they came up with tie-dye, right? And then I was thinking, okay, so if that bounced off somehow and reached the emo scene later on, like where did you get all the emo t-shirts? And that all sort of was located in Hot Topic, right? So I thought, okay, there's a big cultural difference between tie-dye shirts, which is more of a DIY kind of thing, and then like this idea where, in my mind, the idea of like, where do I buy an emo t-shirt? I go to this corporation that like has kind of been known to like keep them, right? And so that also marks a different era in time, because malls didn't exist in the 60s, right? And so it shows also this change in popular culture. And then I was thinking, well, you know, these must be planets in the solar system of like t-shirt making or something like that. So I was kind of zooming out at the same time. So I was thinking, okay, all these like cultural ideas also kind of like regions, you know. And so so I was also developing a language, a kind of a graphic language, and thinking about like emodom or hippiedom, or like fandoms, or like these cultural things as kind of planets. And so what things orbit between the planets, and when things hit these different planets, what pops out of them, right? So from the point of view of like making apparel, I was like, all right, if generosity is hitting these planets and all these planets want to make shirts, like what kind of things come out of that? If I put money here and I send money over to hippiedom and then send money over to emo, like I'm thinking like, okay, what kind of things pop out there? so I was kind of like, you know, it's a very unstructured kind of funny doodle. But, and, you know, it could beget other more, let's say more like, more organized or more strict kind of doodles, right? But when I'm thinking about this, I'm not just thinking like of the one angle that I'm taking things. I'm also thinking, how am I actually spatializing this problem, or like thinking about these different things? And so drawing really helps with that. And then, so the second part of this is that my roommate Alex noticed that I drew the peace sign upside down. And I wasn't really thinking about that. You know, I was just drawing, I kind of like started this drawing actually just doodling, and the peace sign was accidental. This is the first thing that I drew in the whole diagram, you know? So I didn't even really know what this diagram was about. Like I sat down at a blank page and I was like, all right, what is it that I'm thinking about right now? And so I just started doodling this. And then eventually I was thinking about my t-shirts, you know? So after Alex told me this peace sign was upside down, I had this pretty funny experience in which I was like, oh, okay, like I want to figure out how to draw a peace sign properly. Like what's the proper way for me to draw a peace sign? And so to the right of the diagram, you can kind of see here, there's this little link, right? So to the right of the page, I started drawing all these peace signs. And then I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the fewest amount of moves that my pen has to make in order to get a peace sign drawn, and how do I have to start that and stuff like that. So I was practicing, and then I kind of arrived at like this here, where you have to start from A, and then you go up, and then you go around, and the motion of going around reaches C, and then you go back and forth. So just to kind of illustrate that in Figma really quick, it's like you would start here, and then you would go around. And because you're going around in this direction, you use the motion that you already have to like go up and then back, right? And so I was thinking of it kind of like, you know, and Alex was kind of working with me, and he had some dissenting views. We were like deciding like what's the best way, and we were really kind of having an argument about this, and like trying to like kind of battle, like, okay, like maybe this way is better, maybe this way is better. And so we thought about like, well, let's have a race or something and try to figure out like if this is the best way, and also maybe we can compare the quality, like, because if you go fast, the sign breaks down and you can't really do it. And so then we like paused, okay, and I drew an X on here. And I was like, all right, maybe it's not about the most efficient peace sign, because why am I even doing this? Like, this is like a fun exercise, but maybe it's actually like about the least efficient peace sign. Like, what would it be like to draw the peace sign in like the least efficient way? And so the manner that we came up with for the least efficient peace sign is something kind of like this. You know, like where like somehow you try to make everything kind of maybe appear all at once, as if you're maybe like sketching something from life, you know, like so it appears to you like a ghost or something, and you have to constantly jump around. And there was something about that that I thought was like incredibly funny, you know, like to draw a peace sign that way. And that's sort of where our, you know, and then so we wrote least efficient, put a star there, like there's something kind of interesting about that, you know. And so I thought, well, maybe that would be funny to watch a peace sign get drawn that way or appear that way, or not know what it was for so long until you finally figure it out. And also the idea of like, how does that relate to the peace sign itself? Like that it starts broken and comes together. And yeah, so I was just kind of mulling over like what it means to draw something very efficiently or not efficiently at all, and what are the qualities of that. And at the time we were watching this BBC Secret History of Writing documentary, which just came out. And so we were kind of like also watching this thing in the background about like hieroglyphics and stuff. So it's like part of this conversation is informed by just what we were absorbing. But then the most interesting thing that I found out is like the fact that how I started this, I said I drew the peace sign upside down, right? Like I drew it wrong, and then Alex corrected me. So all this being said, last night I was in bed, and I was looking at the Wikipedia article for peace signs. Okay, because I was like, all right, like, where did this thing come from? Like, what's the deal? Like, I don't really know like where this actually came from. And so I was reading about the designer of the peace sign, and it's been said that the peace sign uses these sort of semaphore signals for like N and D for nuclear disarmament. So it's like a combination of these signals. But that actually wasn't intentional. That was just found after the design was made. And so one of the things that I saw, which was really interesting, which was that it's a direct reference to this painting. So the person who made the peace sign was directly referencing the pose in this painting, right? So this is where the peace sign designer got the idea for making this form.
I didn't know that.
You know,
that's crazy.
yeah. So yeah, so that's what it says in the article, and then it says in the article, where is it? Yeah, so it says the reference is to Goya's 3rd of May, although the peasant shown in this painting has his arms stretched upwards, not downwards. So the funny thing about this is that the designer of the peace sign had a memory of the painting that was actually different from what the painting actually is. So their memory of the painting was someone with their arms down, right? Like in the peace sign, but the actual painting itself has someone with their arms up.
That's cool.
So all of a sudden I realized that the designer of the peace sign actually got it upside down too. You know, because they were inspired by this pose, but their memory of the pose was reversed. And so I realized that there's something funny about turning a peace sign upside down, which is like it's also fixing it according to its influence, you know.
Awesome.
So anyway, that was kind of my like diagramming adventure last night that I wanted to share. And I think it's kind of interesting to like, you know, sometimes it's interesting to target your research like really specifically and be like, all right, I'm researching this one thing, but also, you know, it's fun to doodle, but do it in kind of like a conscious way where you're like doodling and also understanding what it is, what interests me about the peace sign. Like, why did I draw it upside down? What's the history of this thing? And then you kind of can uncover these really funny, you know, facts or these pieces of knowledge that might relate to what you're actually doing.
Very cool.
Yeah, anyway, that's my tale.
Well, it brought up a lot of really great stuff. I mean, I think that's such an interesting, one of the things I liked about it, just responding to what you showed us is, you know, we compared the one that I did, which was very linear. And I don't consider myself a linear thinker natively. I have to really work really hard to sort that out. It's like a deliberate process for me. And I'm really interested in what you were showing, which was more of this kind of like you're thinking of almost like a constellation of these planets and these things, and like the relationships aren't necessarily ironed out completely. It's like, oh, this means this. Like, there's always an element, I think, of kind of almost like rhetorical deception when you simplify something. You know, like, do you want this? Or do you want this? And you're like, oh, I want that. You know, like it's kind of like you're creating this false choice almost. And I think what was interesting is you've got this very schematic, diagrammatic thing, but it's not, you know, it's like you're looking for relationships that aren't necessarily explicit at the moment that you make the drawing. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So like, I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to actually show it, because it's sitting next to me on my desk. I wasn't actually going to show it in the class, but then just realizing that you showed a sequence, and a sequence is one way of thinking, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Yeah. And I showed something that didn't have an order, and often things that don't have an order are really useful in order to like help you find an order in them, you know. And it's also okay if things go in a different direction than what you intended, because you can always look back at your sort of like messy, unordered stuff, especially if like the messy, unordered stuff is actually done with discipline, you know. Like the diagram that I showed is like a funny, like it's a doodle, but it's also kind of, you know, like human beings are kind of sophisticated, you know, like we draw boxes around things and lines, and like we can kind of understand what we're thinking. But there does reach a point in which, you know, let's say you are scrolling all over a page and it's so disorganized that it's like disorganized disorganization.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's one thing to like know that you're not really clear on thinking, or know that you need like a free space to think,
Mhm.
and then like doing that intentionally and sort of like marking off like different sort of like regions of what you're thinking about. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm.
Like it's okay to be chaotic with your ideas, but
Well,
also like it's useful to draw a box around that chaos, because then you can point to it and understand it.
yeah, absolutely. I think there's something really powerful about that. And I think about like, you know, maybe people have different experiences of this. When I wake up in the morning, oftentimes there's almost like this constellation map of thought that's happening, but it's like it's just like but it kind of strikes me as an image, but not like a literal image. But and then if I try to break it down into what I'm actually thinking, it's impossible. It's like it'd be like 500 different things that are all interconnected in some way that I don't actually understand. You know, it's like this kind of flash of insight or understanding, but it doesn't break down into that linear. Like if I were to do like my little rock climber diagram of what I was thinking, you know, but I thought that was really cool. I mean, in your diagram, it's like you're introducing, like there are all these things that aren't necessarily yeah, like linearly connected, but you're letting yourself find that, what that might be. And that's exciting. I don't know, that's just exciting for me to see that process, you know, in someone else.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I guess I just kind of feel like our usual association with like sort of messy drawing, like quote unquote messy drawing, is that it's done in a state of you not paying attention,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or like paying attention mostly to something else.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so I kind of just want to maybe like show the class that like if you're really paying attention, you can still be messy in a disciplined way and get some really valuable things out of it. But it's kind of this thing where it's kind of like rock climbing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's like rock climbing for ideas. You know, like it's going to be messy. You're going to have to put footholds into weird places, or you might slip a little bit sometimes. You might have to put extra chalk on your hands. You know, like you might reach the edge of some weird corner and have to like turn the page or something, but you're actually climbing a thing. You're not just, you know, on the phone moving your pen around aimlessly, right? You're actually like going somewhere. And so that I think that for an artist, that's kind of interesting, because for a long time I didn't really do this stuff. And instead I kind of would either like draw a picture or make like notes like line by line, you know, if I was listening to a lecture or something like that. I didn't really understand that there was some kind of in between that would help me out, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, you know, is funny to maybe segue into the, you know, the stuff that I went and looked at today of my old stuff. But like that idea, maybe what you're, I mean, if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, like you were kind of trying to do it almost like the right way. Like, this is the way I think I'm supposed to be taking notes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I used to think that, okay, like, so this page will be like a picture.
Yeah.
And then on this page, maybe I'll do like thumbnails. And then on this page, it's like I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so funnily enough, like my notebook, like even though all the pages would be blank, I would think about it as if like each page was like a different app on my computer and was somehow like limited structurally or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know if that this kind of diagramming or whatever, like free diagramming, is just like a new app for a page.
Well, it's,
or if it's just like, if it, because I feel like it kind of changed the way that I approach what I do on paper anyway, you know. Like I can still look at a page and make a beautiful drawing, and I enjoy that. I can still like just write on a page, but more often than not, when I actually want to think of stuff, it tends to be more chaotic, but I actually do it. I like pay attention to it.
I totally get what you mean, and I'm gonna kind of butt in about my experiences taking notes in middle school. I would basically just copy the slideshow with everything that they basically copy the slides, and that because I didn't really know how to write good notes, I wasn't taught how to, and I have trouble with auditory processing, so it's really impossible for me to take someone talking and transfer that into notes unless it's a recording. I can like pause it and move it around and all that. However, in between the teacher talking and going to the next slide, on the opposite side of the margin, I would actually doodle, and those little doodles would usually be about the topic I was learning about. Like, for example, if I was learning about the American Revolution, I would do like a little British flag, an American flag, and little soldiers. And for some stupid reason, I got in trouble for doodling, even though the doodling was actually helping me process what she was telling me.
I think that's amazing. Yeah, I think that's so important, actually. You know, there were two things that you said that I really was responding to. I mean, the first one was, how do I take notes, right? That idea of I remember it wasn't really until I got into college that, like in high school, I just kind of just listened to what my teacher said and was like, whatever, you know. But like in college, I said, oh, I'm supposed to take notes because I'm in college. You know what I mean? Like it was that idea.
Yeah, for me, it was like you're always supposed to take notes, except no one teaches you, one,
right,
how to take notes, and two, when you do decide to take notes, there's a preconceived notion that, oh, it's supposed to be like a bunch of lines and all of that.
Like, what does it mean? But I think
Exactly.
what's wonderful, what you said, is that you had to figure out a way that worked for you.
Yeah, despite the teacher disagreeing and getting me
Even
in
though
trouble.
it's wrong, right? Yeah, exactly. And then they say, oh, you're doing it wrong. I had the same thing where I got in trouble for doodling during a lecture. You know, it was the same thing when I was in junior high, actually. It was the same thing. And it was this weird moment, right? Like, oh, you're doing it wrong. And that's exactly what I think the notebook process is about, is like, it's about us discovering a way that works for us. And this idea that somehow, if you're doing it your own way, that's like cheating almost. And I think I might have mentioned this before, but this reminds me, the show Deadwood, which was an HBO show in 2004. Anyway, it's a interesting show, Western kind of, you know, deconstructionist kind of a thing. But the creator, David Milch, the way he would write the show was, and I remember I was just completely blown away when I read this process, is that he would just be in a room and he would have a bunch of people, like a couple, 3 or 4 people, co-writers and assistants in the room. And he would sit there and he would just talk, and they would write stuff down that he was saying, you know. And it was like this weird, almost like a you know,
Dictation.
yeah, like but it was kind of weird. It wasn't like he was like, take a memo, you know. It wasn't like this linear, it wasn't a linear process. And you could see, like, you know, he would like lie on the desk, or he'd be like, like, you know, swear engine, I'm coming for you, I'm gonna get you, you know, or whatever. You can imagine these kind of monologues and these things kind of emerging out of this very physical process. And it had nothing to do with him, you know, at a typewriter or writing little things down in his notebook. And I went like, oh my God, like that's unbelievable. Like that's writing, you know?
Yeah, or it's like writing is what they assigned other people to do so that they could be free to not write because writing isn't necessarily the craft of coming up with good stuff.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's the craft of writing that good stuff down.
Literally writing it down. Right. Exactly. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do. It's and I think that's the computer. It's like, who cares?
Well, it's technology in general,
Technology
right?
itself.
The idea that you would somehow conflate or like think of the act of like recording something
Yeah.
as also somehow like the thing that gives you the ideas, you
Yeah.
know. So I think it just happens differently for different people, right? Like, picking up a trumpet and improvising a song, or like coming up with a song, is certainly possible, but also some people don't think that way, right? They sit in the chair and they write down all the notes and they imagine what it will be like, then they play it, then they go back, right? And so these are like different kind of algorithms for like doing stuff and seeing the results.
Yeah.
And it just, it sounds like this writer kind of like was like, all right, I just have to say stuff. Like, that's me at my most creative. My most creative is like not putting words down, but like speaking words out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I don't know does anybody know what abracadabra translates to?
Oh.
Basically means as I speak, I create. Like,
Mm.
my speech is my creation.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
kind of like word of God type stuff, like
Yeah.
like as I speak, I'm also making the world. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the model that this writer has, sort of, I think,
Yeah.
like through talking and also like other people listening, and through that kind of like, someone saying like wizard definition.
Yeah.
No, abracadabra doesn't come from wizards.
Yeah.
That's funny though.
It's cool to see people processing this.
It's
I think
Arabic,
it really
basically.
hits a nerve, about like, oh, I can do whatever I want. Like, I was thinking like, and I think we're so embarrassed. There's that documentary. I still haven't seen it. Wayne White is it? But Beauty is Embarrassing. That like, that when we're making something, of course it's embarrassing. It's play. Like, as animators, we have to get up and act out. Like, I think I talked about before, we have to like, act things out. If we're pretending to be a koala bear or a Tyrannosaurus, or we're, shooting laser beams out of our eyes, we have to get up and act this stuff out, or like the whistlegraph stuff is great because like you're doing voices, you're doing like, but of course you're doing that because you're making it up. Like, these are characters that don't exist, and like, it's play, and I think that's so exciting when you think about it, in terms of, you can apply this to serious things, that the line between like, I think it's kind of a sign of how we're kind of brutalized by the education that we get sometimes to conform first, learning it doesn't really matter. It's about this kind of conformity. It's a really cool process. I think everyone is kind of struggles with that, and in their own way. And I think that struggle is really important. And so that when we're going to look at these notebooks, we're not like evaluating them for conformity to our preconception of what you should be doing. That's not what we're doing. It's a chance to kind of,
And for some people who might really, let's say, take to Figma and use it for something as like maybe like as an all-encompassing thing, like as a diary or journal or something, or like if you're really a visual kind of scrapbooking type person, it might make a lot of sense to like use that for a lot of stuff. But for other people, it might be more of a plug-in in your process, right? Right now, and that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be this like it's just a tool, right? So the idea is like, how can you figure out how to use this tool in a useful way for you right now, while also learning about some of these concepts about creativity and like growing your practice and things like that. So Miles, we were talking a little bit about your kind of sketchbook journey the other day. And you went and found your first sketchbook ever, right?
I did. It was crazy. It was absolutely.
Do you have it with you?
I do. Actually, I didn't bring it back up but I took some photos of it, so I have some images here. I did take a picture of the outside of it, but it was. I just went down this morning, and it was really. It kind of was not what I expected. It was really
Mhm.
something else, but really totally germane to what we're talking about. Here I've got,
Really?
yeah, in a way that I didn't even expect from yesterday, thinking about it. Let's see here. Where is that? Yeah, so it's funny. Oh, just one more thing. While I'm looking for this, I'll just put this up here. Why am I the way that I am? Here we go. This is the schematic from Diablo 2, the expansion that my friend was working on, and it's ended up at my house. But
Oh, was your friend working at Blizzard?
yeah, when he was working at Blizzard, this is the Diablo 2 expansion.
I see. So that's like a game. So this is like a game design. This is a
Yeah.
this is a diagram that was made for a game, but isn't part of. It's not part of the game. It's not part of the manual. This is just for the team who's working on
This
it.
is for the team. Yeah. So this is a working document, and it's not visually the layout of the game. So the game wasn't like a bunch of rectangles that are connected together. It's a realistic world, So it's not. But this schematically, it's clicked together like Lego blocks, so that they could
Mhm.
kind of conceptualize what the narrative progression is through the game, and where it goes, and
Right.
how it moves through it. But it's a very
Yeah.
schematic diagram, like we were talking about, and like Jeffrey was just demonstrating for us. Like when you're thinking about the idea and the progression and kind of the writing, so a lot of you are interested in writing. Writing can have this visual component because, like Jeffrey was saying, it's not about literally writing things down. It's about coming up with the idea itself.
Yeah. And writing itself is what is writing if not a standard for creating linear sequences of images that we can read and associate sounds with. So if you really want to think about the way things are maybe in your head, you have to come up with different structures that aren't linear sequences of things that you make sounds from. It's just faster that way, I think.
Yeah.
That kind of reminds me of Dante's Inferno, though. That must have been their inspiration.
Totally.
Because you start on this smaller circle of danger, and then you go down and down until you reach the final circle.
Totally. That's funny. Yeah, so this is that first sketchbook. I just took a quick picture here. This little crane book here.
Oh, nice.
I found these other sketchbooks too. This is another one here. And all three of these here are older than Jeffrey. So they're older than most of you guys. Because this is from the before times of 1980. This sketchbook dates from 1984. So this is like an ancient relic.
Wow.
So I got this, I know. So these are over 30 years ago. And so it was really a trip. And I've just had these in a box. I have boxes full of these sketchbooks. But these are the first ones that I consider my sketchbooks, after, I have kid stuff. I have a couple things from when I was a kid, but like a little kid. But these are, this is when I'm a freshman in college. And so it was really wild to go back to this stuff and think about it in terms of what we've been talking about in here. I'll just kind of, I guess I'll just throw all these, open these up. I don't know where preview went to. Preview seems to have disappeared from my reality. There it is. Okay, well, I'll see if I can open these up.
And when you got this book, you actually didn't even know you wanted to be an artist, right?
Exactly.
You were going to Yale for undergrad. You didn't know that this book was given to you by your high school sweetheart, you said?
Yep, there it is. There's the inside of it. Dawn.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, Dawn's cool.
Wow, that's really sentimental.
I know, it's sweet. That's kind of amazing. So, and then I wrote here, this is from, because when I was a freshman, I was taking French, and we watched this film. It was really, really awesome movie, actually, called Jules et Jim, Jules and Jim. And it was a trip, because I watched this early days, and they showed it to us entirely in French, and my French really sucked. So like I was watching this insane, cool film without really understanding what was going on. Anyway, I just remember that like Jean Moreau was the really cool, French love interest in this love triangle. So, et moi, Jean. So anyway, so yeah. But that's, yeah. So this is kind of neat. I mean, it was neat to go back and see this, and I think a lot of these, I'll just kind of scroll through here. This is from the other one that was also from around that same time. But what I'm seeing when I looked through these was really kind of what Jeffrey was just talking about. Like this kind of, I was trying to figure out what I was doing, like what, and these are a little bit later after I've got some image. I don't have it organized really, but like, this is a little bit later after taking my first drawing class. So, but I think I'll have some stuff in here. It's even before I was doing that, but like where I'm thinking about like, what kind of vision.
What were you thinking about there?
What was it with which one?
This one, yeah. Do you remember what?
Well,
No, the really crazy one.
No, I mean, there are these notes in here, this writing, I'm writing, like there's notes I'm taking on books, but also things that I'm just writing out. And then there's this kind of graphic comic language kind of starting to happen too that I'm interested in. But there's this feeling like I don't know how to do that right. And here's like a self-portrait, but I've got these strange little scrawly things happening, and this kind of goofy, like awkward self-portrait that's kind of, this was really bizarre. I'm like, what the hell is that? And then this is like a nude, like kind of Matisse kind of drawing over here. And then this is this is a girlfriend thing here. But like these kind of weird experiments with like different graphic languages, that like awkward things that are awkward. Is this same, And I was thinking about like this drawing that I saw, which is this weird kind of awkward drawing of Ashley. And then I was thinking about Ghost World, and I'm like, well, these things aren't really all that different in a funny way. This is by the Dan Clowes. But there's something about, I don't think I really understood how to make these things kind of, how they could become something else. I was kind of like, well, this is the drawing that I did at the end, as opposed to,
so you weren't really thinking of these things as like objects or artworks at all.
Or even as ideas. But this is what I think the stuff tended to look like, was really, this is from the early actual notebook. Yeah. Like stuff crap like this, like where
the failed cup drawing.
Failed cup, like, oh, how do I draw the lips in space?
Yeah.
Which is, this cracks me up. Like it's so like, what? And then the same thing here. But then out of this is like these stupid cylinders, but then there's this creature starting to emerge out of this. Like I can't really, and this is so like, yeah, I'm thinking about like, what am I supposed to do in a notebook? Like this seemed something more respectable. Like, oh, here are these birds and these, here's a little landscape that I'm looking at in my courtyard. And here are like these little studies of these pillars. And then over here is kind of this cool thing of like, almost like a Chinese, like, oh, these objects arranged in space, these birds. And I just didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I think that's the thing that really blows me away about this, is like, I really see like how unsure of myself and kind of how tentative I was. And I couldn't recognize like I was like I couldn't take what I was doing and fully like understand it, you know, or kind of accept it, you know, that and so there would be like I was just experimenting with this different each
Oh, nice.
really different.
This
Yeah.
is in one of those first sketchbooks.
Yeah. This
So
is
just
all,
like,
yeah, all over the place. And then the next page would be this. You know? It
yeah,
was,
like page after page is extremely different,
yeah,
you know,
just
approaches.
nothing like I don't know what I'm doing because I guess I thought I'll be like a guy that's always drawing from observation, and I'll be like the hand drawing guy or something, you know, like, and I'll be known for my Michelangelo like Sistine Chapel like studies. It's like no, you know, and then the next page would be this, you know, and it's like what the hell, like, you know.
Hmm.
Okay.
And so you were learning about like a bunch of stuff too at the time, right? So you were like in
Yeah.
college, you were
Wow.
like drawing in this first sketchbook, kind of like going all over the place, or like, you know, kind of trying to understand why you had this stuff.
Yeah.
So like what, oh, that's so yeah, so like what were some of the classes that you took that maybe changed? Like how did you actually change or like find a direction out of all this stuff, you know,
Yeah.
out of
Well,
this chaos?
I mean, one of the big things I think that I was like one of the biggest influences of this time was William Blake. And so this is, I was taking a poetry class because I was an English major, and I had not heard of this poet before, you know, even though he's well known and a lot of people might have seen some of his work in high school, but I hadn't. And this is a poem. And so he illustrated all of his poems himself, and he would publish them, self-publish them. So it was really a trip. He would
And
self-publish these poems in these.
when was this?
This is in like I think this is from the collection Songs of Innocence and Experience, and I want to say it's around 1783, something like that.
Okay,
1700s,
1783.
late 1700s in England, and London is this hellish city, you know, and he wrote this poem, you know, and but I remember seeing this and like my mind kind of exploded because this was a poetry class. So poetry is incredibly boring to look at on the page. You know, if you look at it, just like, well, it's not very interesting to look at. But this was like, whoa. And, you know, if you just Google William Blake, you know, it's like, dang, this is cool. You know, here he is over here. But like, you know, he's this awesome, basically a comic book artist, really. I don't know if you guys saw.
But there weren't really comic books in 1783.
No, there was nothing like that. As far as these were all hand engraved in a traditional printmaking process. You know, he would do like a watercolor or a drawing, then he would go through this crazy process of engraving these things with chemicals on a metal plate and then running them off by hand to make copies. So like he might make like a run of like 20 or 12, or because then each thing had to be hand watercolored, and his wife would do a lot of that too. So
that poor woman.
But these things are just really, really wild. I mean, and he had his own characters and his own cosmology and his own thing, and he was just making it up. You know, he was like just doing, you know, going to town basically, and he did stuff on Dante. You mentioned Dante. He did a whole illustration of the Divine Comedy, and but I one of the things that he just became kind of more and more and more significant to me. I mean, even over the years, like I keep coming back to it, and it's like even better. Like as I get like, you know, 30 years later, it's like wow. Tiger.
And what is it? What is it about that? Is it because he somehow is like one of the like first comic, like he kind of is like a comic book person before comics existed, so he's like a prototype for that
he's
whole
kind of a prototype
world.
Yeah. And then I think even, yeah. And I think just going like the totality, it's like he's not trying to be one thing or the other. He's like, well, yeah, he's a great poet. And so he was a big deal in poetry. Eventually he wasn't at the time, but he was also an artist, and he was this kind of weird mix. And like you said, like, yeah, he's kind of a proto comic artist, but also this kind of weirdo, do it at all, like kind of not unapologetically just being like, look at this great diagram, this is like the kind of stuff that he would do anyway. Yeah, like this yeah, but kind of a proto comic book artist and then after that, everything else was kind of boring, in the rest of the class. It was like, who cares about Wordsworth,
And yeah, so you were an English major, and so you're mostly studying literature.
Yeah.
But you like have this sketchbook and are interested in drawing, but kind of in a chaotic, you don't really find your way. And then all of a sudden in English class, because this person is canonized, it's like, oh, here's a poet. And what this poet was that's different is that like they drew and painted all their poems.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they're kind of known as known as this like famous literature poet person, but also they're doing all this stuff that you're interested in separately.
Exactly.
And so you somehow gravitated towards that, even though the class wasn't about art or whatever. You're like, oh, that's like a figure I can look at now.
Yeah,
or something.
Exactly. And then that same semester, we get a visit to our campus from Maurice Sendak, the children's book author and illustrator, who did Where the Wild Things Are, which many people are familiar with. And he came and gave a talk, and he said, well, I have three kind of spiritual artistic fathers. First one is William Blake. And I went like, what? No. And the second one is Mozart, right? The composer, the musician. And third one is the author von Kleist. And but I was really blown away by William Blake. I went, oh, I get it. I saw it. I started to, this was me going, I get what he's saying. I see it in there, And again, Maurice Sendak is someone that wrote and illustrated his own stuff, and it was like, whoa, like that's cool. Like I want to do that, even though I felt like, I don't know how to do that. That's ultimately kind of what I want to do. And he talked about this, and he said, I'm not the world's greatest artist or something. I'm okay. I'm good, but I'm not like, that's not why. If anything, it's because I have the bravery to think about what it really feels like and means to be a child, and I have very vivid memories about that and how difficult that was and how intense it is. And so this is from Where the Wild Things Are. And just for the class, I thought it was wonderful. This is a super famous book. I would, I guess most people show it, but just as a way to think about it, like you can see the dummy. This is him, kind of working through that idea. So he didn't start off, it didn't draw this, he did this. And this already is actually kind of advanced pretty far along. But that, when I look back at my own sketchbooks, what I was realizing is I didn't conceive of this process, which is a workflow of rough to refinement, again, it's pretty linear when you see it, but like, I didn't know how to do that. I was like, well, how do I do that? And then to see this is like, oh, I didn't see this at the time. I wish I had. I didn't see this till like 10 years later.
These are his sketchbooks, basically.
Yeah, these are his. This is his, what you call a book dummy, and a dummy.
Right. So he's like thinking in sequences and also sketching in the sequence.
Yeah,
like,
but here's the thing that really blew me away is that Where the Wild Things Are. It started off as this is even another level beyond. It started off
a really skinny book.
Yeah, it started off as Where the Wild Horses Are, and he did it, as a free association experiment, kind of like you could do for this class, just saying like, what happens if I just sit down and just let myself draw whatever? And so it's this little linear thing of like, this person walks along to where the wild horses are, they see a sign, and then, don't let them see you, hide your eyes. And I don't know why this is the wrong size here, let me do that. And the horse bucks him and throws him off, and he falls out of his clothes. And that became a big thing in The Night Kitchen, which was his second big book that he wrote himself, where the kid falls through the sky and out of his clothes. And then beware, and then a monster comes and he's chased around and he escapes into the ocean, and he finds a boat and he gets on the boat and then he sails away. And first of all, he said, I didn't really like drawing horses, so I changed it to things. But secondly, what's cool is you can really see that he reverses a lot of these sequences. He has these little pieces of a narrative that they're not in the quote unquote right order that he settles on, but the pieces are all there, but they get moved around. And some of those pieces even become part of a story that he's not going to write for another 6 or 7 years.
Right. Yeah, but this idea that like they just grab this weirdly formed book, and hand paint the whole thing.
Yep.
First of all, I think one thing that's interesting about that is like they're taking it seriously.
Yes.
So they're like, okay, here's the book where the wild horses are. This is like, this little sketchbook of mine is like a quote unquote project. Like, I'm going to make this as complete as I can. And maybe I don't really know where it's going to go, but it sounds like that became like, like that book wasn't published, right? We're looking at it now as like maybe an artifact of the process by which these other more important works were published. But like that was, almost like a Rosetta Stone of ideas, right? Like coming up with different narrative sequences that could be reused, thinking about things that might happen, even if they might be reversed. But also kind of developing maybe a kind of discipline, because, once you actually have to sit down and do the published book, you also have to sit down and do the published book, So it's like, if you already made these dummy books by hand, like you have an idea of how you might refine that and how you might make another dummy and another dummy, and like sort of like getting into this process of just making getting a book and making a picture book out of it is like a really interesting way of sort of figuring out what you should be practicing, knowing the ins and outs of the medium.
And as a 19, 20, 21-year-old artist, part of the problem that I had was that I was looking at like finished work and I had no idea how to get there, right? Like, and what I wish someone had kind of really been able to like kind of let me know is that where I was, the ideas that I had and where I was starting from was great. It's like, it's good. You're all good there. That's awesome. Now it's just what you were saying, Jeffrey. It's like, now learn, what did you call it? A discipline, like to develop a discipline, a process, a method of taking these ideas and giving them a chance to flow and refine in the way that's going to be satisfying to me, as an artist. Like, I want it to be a certain thing. So how do I get there? And what was striking to me this morning when I was down there looking at my stuff, I was like, oh my God, like I had all the right stuff. It was all there. I just didn't know how to do it,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think one of the hard parts about being an artist and coming up with your own projects and doing like self-directed projects, and also making those projects exist in the world and be successful to different degrees, or having an audience that cares about them, just like coming up with unique, interesting ideas that you really care about, that you want to work on, and actually being able to work on those and get that stuff out there is like kind of alien to a lot of people at first. And I think the reason why is because, like, if we were to use, let's say, like Minecraft like pretty much a classic game now as an example. Like, when you load up Minecraft, it generates a whole world for you, and then you can like go through that world and find the diamonds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if the diamonds in Minecraft, let's say, are like the things that you want to use in your project, like metaphorically speaking, as an artist, you actually don't have that world that's like generated for you. Like, you kind of have to like do creative work. Like this Maurice Sendak like dummy book is like him generating the like Minecraft landscape out of his own stuff. So then like the level, like sort of the world is like something that he built.
Yeah.
And then in that world that he built, he can go and find the diamonds and then like use that for the next thing to build the next world. And I think one of the biggest traps for artists when they're first starting out is thinking that that world that they're mining the diamonds from is in the work of other people that they admire. And so it's easy to, so you take things and take skills and ideas of what tools to use, or you're inspired by images by other artists, and you grab things and pull things and steal things, and that's really good. But the things that you're grabbing and pulling and stealing are diamonds that are crafted by other people out of the worlds that they've built. And usually once people get good and you admire them, they tend to have already going this process of like building something of their own and refining it. And so to kind of get that skill of like feeling comfortable making your own stuff and then pulling out the stuff that you love from it, like that's also a skill of like knowing what you like about your own stuff and also knowing what you don't like about your own stuff. So in order to actually do that, first of all, you have to have a level of self-esteem in which you can draw something or make something and be like, oh, I really love this, right? So if you're only hating everything that you're doing, it's actually going to be impossible for you to have like to move further than that, because you're not going to see any of the diamonds, like they're not going to be there because you're not believing that there's anything to take. So it's also kind of a confidence problem.
Totally.
And so because artists in our culture are still a little bit kind of put down, often by their families, or, it's questionable whether you're becoming a designer or artist, like, you also have the confidence stuff going against you too when you're starting out. So it's like the whole point is like so that you can have like ideas about what you make that you like or dislike that keeps you going.
Yeah.
But like there's a lot of things working against you learning that.
I love that. I think it's like, because you're trying to be vulnerable at the same time. Like you're trying to, like you're saying, like you need to have the confidence to be vulnerable. You need to have the confidence to be embarrassing. Because as an artist, you're kind of exposing yourself in a way. It's vulnerable. It's like you're talking about something that's emotional, that's painful, that's like, or joyful, or and you're saying like, this is important to me, but I think it's also important for our kind of shared humanity, for our shared experience, and that and that we're so unconfident about that at the beginning.
Yeah, it's cool to see your first sketchbook, because you can see like your kind of crazy sort of like not necessarily in confidence, but like you're doing things that you might want to keep doing. Like it sounds like when you explain that, it's like you're doing stuff and you're like, oh, maybe I'll be this kind of person or this kind of person. But at the same time, it's like you're not really finding, it sounds like you weren't really holding on to anything in particular until you maybe had like William Blake as like a figurehead. And then this other person, Maurice Sendak, who you already respected, talking about them too. And then you became part of like a network of value. And then you look back at your sketchbook and you're like, oh, sequences of images. Like I like sequences of images. Like William Blake did that. Maurice Sendak did that. I'm now part of like I'm like the grandson or something, So you put yourself into this cultural network in which all of a sudden your page can be valued based on some of that stuff, and you have an idea of what you like and don't like, and keep going. And so it's kind of interesting to see, like, you know, now you can just sit down and do this sort of like little rock climbing doodle really easily and kind of figure out like what the little graphic language is for that, because you've kind of trained yourself to think in these sequences, right? And so that's kind of like a great default for you to create from. It's like sequences of images, right?
Cool. That's awesome. Well, great. I think that's about it. Oh, we have someone raise their hand here. Cynthia? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I was gonna say something like, because I was on the topic of the whole kind of like revisiting and looking back on other sketches,
Mm-hmm.
like filled out sketchbooks that you've done. Because like for myself, I've noticed that I kind of went back through all the other two older sketchbooks I have that I completely filled out, and there was like one or two things that I found that I kind of revisited and redid in my new one, like that isn't full, that I'm kind of working on right now. And I kind of redid a couple of the drawings, like to see if I improved or not, kind of thing, or did it in a different way. And it's kind of, I've been asking myself, like, how worth it is it? Like, which one of these should I be revisiting, kind of thing? Like, which ones are actually that important to me? Because I remember drawing certain things in older ones from like a year ago for the purpose of like, I was going to make stickers when I was away in Washington. I was going to start my own like thing, and then it never happened. So they were kind of abandoned.
Well, that's exactly it though. I mean, I think what you're asking is like, what should I do? What's the right way to, like, what's the best? Is like, those are the right questions, you know? And I think that to get answers from them means to experiment with it, try it, do it, share it with your friends, get some feedback from other people, you know, hey, which one of these do you like, or whatever, because then it becomes real. It starts to become like Jeffrey was saying, it's like, oh, these are like the diamonds that we're playing with. It becomes something that's actually yours, that's in play in the world. So that's great.
And in my experience, when I look back at my old pictures and I think of reworking something or like redoing something, I often am thinking in terms of like, oh, like when I was making this picture, I was like using this pen and like thinking in a certain way.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
like, and so I'm like, maybe I just want to think in the way that I was thinking while I was drawing that thing again, and now I can do it better. So it's not so much like, oh, this is a beautiful image and I want to repaint the image that came out. It's like, I want to do things in a manner that I did with this image, but now I can do it better. And so maybe even a different image pops out. But
yeah,
like,
I definitely like added a couple of things that weren't there before, with like
so it's like the recipe is what you want to redo, not necessarily like the actual, you know, the diamond, for example, isn't necessarily like an object that you want to like polish off. It's like a program that you can follow again, you know, like go back and modify.
It's funny, I really just, when in this one sketch here, I was like, I wanted to go back and like fix this, not fix it, but just to say, oh, this is the silhouette. Like, I didn't really have a silhouette here, so I was like, oh, this is actually it right here. So it was just funny today that came up just this morning, of like going back to something from 30 over 30 years ago. Like, just I really had to stop myself from just going in and like fixing it. So, well, great. Like, we should leave it here.
It's really hard to go back to things. Yeah, we should leave it here. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll leave it here, but we'll hang out. You know, we'll hang out for a couple minutes so we can kind of keep the conversation going if people want to talk to us. But thanks a lot, guys. And experiment with your own notebooks, and we'll see you all in recitation later on this week. All right.
Yep.
Cheerio.
Bye.